that weekend that I had accepted Christ and then went out with my buddies and came back, and I just read the Word and prayed the whole weekend, and the joy and the freedom was just so incredible. I just can't describe it, and I've never been the same since. And it was just a few months after that that I got out of the Navy and heard about the navigators in San Diego and was able to go down there and be involved with them. I didn't move into the navigator home right away. I worked, my first job was when I got out of the Navy. I was going, well, let me go back a little bit. I started school at San Diego State, and they had a really neat rule back then that if you were out of the service, honorable discharge, and you had a high school diploma, it didn't matter what your grades were, they had to let you in. And so I got into San Diego State College with a D plus average in high school. And all the way through college, 4 years, I had to carry this card, a student body card that was different color, and I was on probation until the day I graduated. But I made it. I got through. And so I went for a couple of years at San Diego State, and I had the GI Bill, but I worked most of the time. I think the first job I had was an ambulance driver, or actually an ambulance attendant. I became a driver later. And that was really neat because we had a place to live, and I just worked at night, and whenever I was on call and went to school during the day. I'd been doing that for a few months when, well, one thing happened. One morning I got up and but there were two of us in the room, two of us that worked together, and I got up and my buddy was lying on his bed with all his clothes on, and I got up in the morning and I went over to shake him, and he was cold as ice and stiff. And we called, and they called the police in, and he died of a heroin overdose. That's one thing I never did was drugs, and I'm sure glad, but that was really a shock. The next partner, I was riding in the ambulance one day, and we were going down San Diego and to pick up somebody that had a heart attack, and we were going about 55. We went through a red light, and a truck was coming from the left, and all I remember is I didn't see that truck, but the driver said, "Watch out for that car on the right," and I was looking at that, and the next thing I knew, I saw these people looking down on me, and I thought, what is this? And what had happened is we hit the truck broadside going 55 miles an hour. We didn't have seat belts in those days. Both of us were thrown out the driver's side of the ambulance, and the ambulance went flipping around. We were thrown out in the middle of the street. The ambulance hit a telephone pole or a power pole, and the driver was injured pretty bad because it hit on his side, and I was knocked out, and I had a lot of bruises and banged up and so forth, and I was in the hospital a few days, and my knees were really kind of banged up, I think, going through this door of the ambulance. When we went back and looked at the ambulance, that door would only open about that far because it had been clobbered, and I don't know how both of us got out, but in the time that it was from it was hit till it hit the telephone pole, we were thrown. I survived that okay. I was going out at the Nav home at the time, and one day I drove the ambulance out there. I was on crutches and had bandages and looked like a terrible sight. And I went out there to the Nav home in San Diego, actually in La Mesa. And I walked in, and there was this gorgeous girl there. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but that's where I first met Bobby and Mom, Grandma, Mama, whatever. And I'll let her tell more of that story. But so
I want to hear it from your perspective.
well, I'll never forget. She was coming down some stairs into the living room, and I just thought, she is the prettiest girl I have ever seen in my life. And it wasn't very long before I thought, I want to marry this girl. And I didn't tell her that, and we'll get into that later. I'll go into that some after a while. But so I met her there. After I finished, I didn't want to be in an ambulance anymore after that accident. So a little while later, I got a job that was a lot more sedate. I worked for a funeral home, and we did what we call first call. And I had my place to stay, and I was going to school during the day. And two of us lived there, and our job was to go out and pick up dead bodies in a hearse. It was a great job, and slow, and a lot better than driving an ambulance. So I did that for quite a while, and then I moved into the Navigator home. I can't remember exactly when, but I lived there about a year, and that was a real life-changing time for me because I had such incredibly rough edges. And it was really wonderful to be in a Nav home, and Jerry Bridges took me on. He was one of the guys living in the home. There were 6 of us. And he started discipling me, and I really grew a lot in the Lord during that time. And I really fell in love with Mom there, but she didn't fall in love with me, and that was in one of the ways it was one of the hardest times of my life, because I was madly in love with her, and here were these other 5 guys. All the others were much handsomer. They were much sharper. They had so much going for them, and I figured I never would have a chance with her. And it was pretty tough. And then I made the mistake of telling the Solums, Glenn and Jeannie Solum, who were running the home, that I liked her. Well, they had a rule: if you like somebody, you can't really have anything to do with them. So I wasn't able to date her, but other guys were able to date her, and so that was killing me to see her go out on dates with some of these other guys. Not guys in the home; that was against the rules, but other guys. And but after a while, it seemed wise that I move out, so I moved out and lived in a little basement apartment with two other Navigator guys when we were going to school. And I started dating your mom, your grandma, great-grandma, whoever's watching this. And let's see, I think it was on Valentine's Day, 1955, that I proposed to your mom, and she said yes.
Wait, first you ask a question.
Well, this wasn't that night, but I did ask, would you be willing to go to the mission field? And I did that before I showed a lot of interest in her, because I had decided, I didn't know if I'd ever be a missionary, but I had decided I would not marry anyone who wasn't willing to go to the mission field. And she said the right things, and she proved to be right. Well, we didn't really date a lot. We just hung out together, and we got to know each other so well, living there in the home together for a year. And I ate your mom's cooking for a year. So we pretty well knew what we were going to get. Then we didn't do I don't think a lot of dating. Our first date was it was a Valentine's banquet. That must have been the day I asked you to marry me.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, that was our first formal date.
Huh.
We went to a Valentine's banquet at a church, and that was really fun.
Wasn't even our church.
Yeah, it wasn't our church, but it did the job. So, let's see, it was probably 6 months after that I transferred from San Diego State up to University of California at Berkeley. And I wanted to go up there because they really had a good reputation, and I thought it would be good for us to be separated for a while, which was really painful. But we really wanted to know if this was God's will, because 2 of the Navigator leaders told me, or told us, that we shouldn't get married. And back then, the navigators were really strong on telling you how to live your life, so.
Why did they say that?
Well, because I was so immature and they thought I was a flake, and that your mom was so mature and it just wasn't a good match. And the Navs really saw me as a flake. In fact, I'll go ahead and tell the story now. Glenn Solom, before he died, we were in his home. This was many, many years after that. That he was kind of laughing and joking, and he said, "Ken, you were a hopeless case," talking about me in the olden days. And I laughed, but I kind of thought, that's really how they saw me was, well, we'll put up with this guy, but he really doesn't have much to offer. And he and Jerry Bridges both strongly urged us not to get married. They just didn't think it was a good match. And that's one of the big reasons we went to, I moved up to Berkeley, was we had 6 months apart. We wrote some, but we really didn't have much contact. And we just both wanted to seek the Lord during that time, and really seek the Lord to see if this was His will, without us being together all the time. And God just really made it clear to us in our spirits that this is what God wanted for us. And it was hard to go against the counsel of our leaders, but we did anyway. What's neat is that both of those leaders and their wives have supported us all these years, and Jerry apologized, said he was wrong. I don't think Glenn ever did, but that's okay. He showed it by his life and his friendship and his support. So went to Berkeley, had 1 semester there, and God just opened up the neatest job. It was a wonderful job. I went to at the school. They had a kind of an employment agency at the school where students could get jobs. And I'll still remember going in there, and they said, well, there's a couple that have a home here and they want a butler, and it's a live-in job, and we don't know if you'd like it or not, but you can go check it out. So I went up there, and it was up in the Berkeley Hills, this gorgeous, then was really a gorgeous home. They had 7 acres this is in exclusive Berkeley Hills. Jonas Salk lived next door. He's the one who invented the polio vaccine. We had tennis courts. They had tennis courts, a swimming pool, beautiful gardens. And they took me in, and I became their butler. So it was really wonderful. And then when we got married, they took both of us in, and they fixed up this beautiful little apartment. Well, it was just a living room and bedroom and bath inside their home, and we had a cook there full time, so we didn't even have to do our own cooking. We had our own cook, and Bobby was the upstairs maid, and I was the butler, and we just really lived in style. We got $110 a month from the government, from our GI Bill, and we got $50 a month pay working with our room and board. And we had so much money we didn't know what to do with it. We just had everything we needed. And every evening I would dress up in a white formal dinner jacket and a black bow tie and a white shirt, and I would serve their dinner, just the 2 of them, formally. So we really learned how the other 1% lived. One of the things that God really spoke to me about during that time was that the biggest or the main topic of conversation at the dinner table as I served them and listened was how bad they felt because they couldn't afford this, they couldn't afford that, and how they wished they had more money. And here we had more money than we could even use hardly. And God spoke to me through Luke 12:15 at that time. It says, "Take heed and beware of all greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And I think the Lord used that later when we went to the mission field. But we really had a great time there until Mom got pregnant with Galen, and the lady of the house, Mrs. Nachtrieb was her name, was really upset, and as time went on, we had to move out, but we lived there about a
She
year.
was angry with me.
Yeah, she was
because it
very
all my
angry.
fault.
She said that Mom ruined my life. It was like I was an innocent bystander in all of this. But we really had good times while we were there. We would serve them banquets, and they would give us extra money, and we just they were gone a lot, and they just said the whole house is yours while we're gone. They had a place up in Lake Tahoe, so we had in our 4 college friends, and we just lived like millionaires. It was really fun.